the instructor would say, please do a 360-degree turn right in the room and show us the room itself, right? I have my items on the desk, which I'll go show in more detail in a minute, right? Demonstrate that there are no posters or other kind of aids around the room to help me, right? Showing the things that are on the desk, pulling them up, right? I have my 10-point outline, right? And nothing written on the back, completely clean. I have excerpt 1. Sorry, did I show that? Yeah, and nothing on the back. And then excerpt 2 with nothing on the back. I'm also going to make sure that I have no electronic devices on me. And that the environment is free of distraction. Okay. So, if you take a look, I'm going to be using this as my area. Oh, I have to go start the timer in the other room. Whatever. Okay, so the instructor will then say, please begin when you're ready, start the timer, and then I will begin. Let me do that now. Okay. So, my name is Sean Kraus, and my IB candidate number is 123456. And today I will be analyzing the text Stamped, Racism, Anti-Racism, and You by Ibram X. Kendi and Jason Reynolds, and a political cartoon drawn by Mark Knight. So first, a little bit of context. Jason Reynolds and Ibram X. Kendi's book is a young adult remix of Kendi's original history text, which was a comprehensive history of racist ideas in America. Black scholar and poet Jason Reynolds was kind of brought on to take the information and put it in such a way that young adult audiences would be able to understand it and grasp it. In the book, Ibram X. Kendi basically breaks people into 3 groups: assimilationists, segregationists or racist, and anti-racists. Chapter 16 of the young adult version of this book focuses on the phenomena of Black and white athletes representing their entire race. Then the Mark Knight's cartoon, it was drawn after Serena Williams loses to Naomi Osaka in the 2018 US Open. The cartoon was published in Australia's The Herald Sun, and in the tennis match itself, the referee had penalized Serena Williams several times for things that male tennis stars get away with all the time. And the cartoon that Mark Knight drew criticizes Serena Williams, but he drew criticism as well because of the way that it's drawn and that it comes across as racist. However, Mark Knight denies that claim and defends his cartoon. So Jason Reynolds and Ibram X. Kendi use diction, symbolism, analogies, humor, allusion, and syntax to convey the message that the common practice of praising or criticizing athletes as representatives of their race has become a common practice, but it is, in fact, racist. Mark Knight's use of exaggeration, Jim Crow-era cartoon techniques, whitewashing, and patronizing dialogue demonstrates that not only is the racist idea of holding up individuals as representatives of their entire race, what Kendi and Reynolds talk about in Stamped, not only is that idea still alive and well, it is a global phenomenon. Okay. So starting with the excerpt. To summarize, in some ways, the lines he says, white people used white fighters to prove superiority over black people in the ring, boxing ring, and therefore in the world. No boxer broke the backs of white people and puffed up the chest of black people like Jack Johnson. He was the most famous black man in America and the most hated because he was the best. He'd beaten the brakes off of every white boxer, and in December 1908, he finally got a shot at the heavyweight title. His opponent, Tommy Burns. The fight took place in Australia, and well, let's just say Jack left Tommy down under. I know, a bad joke, a dad joke, a bad dad joke, but still a fact. So here in those first couple of sentences, right, Kennedy and Reynolds are setting up the symbolism, right, of there's a battle being fought, but it's more than just black versus white. It's also this intellectualism versus the everyman, right? The use of syntax and fragments is done to add emphasis, right? Especially when he said stuff like, and he was the most famous black man in America, stop, and the most hated, stop, because he was the best. And while this is serious, Reynolds also uses jokes or humor, especially in those lines where he said bad dad joke, because several times throughout the book, he tries to kind of make it come across that this is not a history book, when in fact it is, but kind of using humor to soften the blow makes it easier for young adult readers to absorb the material. I want to talk about the last paragraph because it links directly to the cartoon and this idea of a double standard with white athletes. Kennedy and Reynolds write, for racist, athletes and entertainers could be spun into narratives of the black aggressor, the natural dancer, etc. Like the reason black people were good wasn't because of practice and hard work, but because they were born with it. Note, black assimilationists have also made this argument, which is racist. It gave white people a way to explain away their own failures, their competitive losses. Also gave them justification to find ways to cheat inside the arena or outside. This idea of the double standard, right? If a white person loses, it's because they didn't train hard enough. But if a black person won, it was just by luck. Is also present in the cartoon when you have the referee use that condescending tone and ask, can you just let her win, right? The idea, the implication that the ref is making is that Serena Williams, because she's black, didn't actually put in effort, didn't actually train, right? Which is an unfair assumption. And obviously this idea that doesn't just extend to her, but happens to many black athletes as well. Then on page 130 of the Kennedy's book and Reynolds' book, there's an analogy of teleportation and blacks' representation and fallacy, right? It says, for black people, however, sports and entertainment were and still are a way to step into the shoes of the big timer. It was a way to use the athlete or the entertainer, Johnson being both, as an avatar, as a representative of the entire race, like human teleportation machines, zapping black people, especially poor black people, from powerlessness to possibility, right? So if Johnson arrived on the scene dressed in fancy clothes, hands adorned with diamonds, all black people were psychologically dressed to the nines, at least for a while. If Johnson talked slick to white men, saying whatever he wanted, all black people got away with a proverbial jab or two in their minds. And most important, if Johnson knocked out a white man, guess what? All black people knocked out a white man, right? And white people couldn't have that. So this idea of the kind of black people being teleported into this role, it's all in their minds. That's the emphasis here, right? It's a fallacy. And the syntax of the sentence shows the importance of thoughts versus deeds, right? Which is linked to the existing racist idea that blacks are violent, right? Similar to in the cartoon, right? Again, if the passage basically says that it was earlier in the passage when it makes the assumption that, all black people are a certain way because they have an innate nature, right? Which makes them natural aggressors or natural dancers. That is, again, not true and being proven here as well. It's also important that while he's talking about Jack Johnson's opponent, the next person he goes up against is described as a great white hope to beat Johnson, right? And the diction there shows a clear racist idea, right? That white people need one person to stand up and basically represent the entire race. That it wasn't a simple boxing match between two athletes and who trained more and who was, as an individual, stronger than the other or a better boxer than the other. It's about one race versus another race. And then again, that short sentence to kind of mark that significant idea when he writes, and white people couldn't have that, right? Johnson winning is important. It also kind of isn't interesting. He kind of said later in the passage, he says, Jeffries, who's the white person, lost too. And though this was a big deal, especially for white people, it was everything else about Jack Johnson, not just his fighting, that set off alarms in the racist world. The second bullet point is probably the most important. He says, the biggest spike in the heart of white America. Jack Johnson's wife was white. Cue the dramatic organ or gunshot with thundercrack or hissing cat or ... right? Ellipses. Johnson had too much power to defeat white men, power to be with white women. And just like with the Haitian Revolution, white people were afraid all black men would feel just as powerful, and that was a no-go. And so the allusion to the Haitian Revolution is used to demonstrate that white fear of black power. It also talks about how corrupt the white officers. Later in the passage, Jack Johnson is arrested, right? And basically, he's arrested for false charges about bringing a woman over state lines. But the white officers involved. Give me 1 second to stop. And they arrested him on trumped up charges of trafficking a prostitute, or rather a white woman, across state lines. She wasn't a prostitute. She was just a white woman. He spent 7 years out of the country before turning himself in and doing a year in jail, right? This all kind of points out that the white officers were corrupt, right? And however, those white officers are not seen as representatives of their race when they do something illegal, right? Just a black person is. And again, we're back to that double standard, which I'm going to come back to in the cartoon. But again, a black person does something wrong, the entire race is kind of lumped together. A white person does something wrong, and if they're even called out on it, it's only that one individual is kind of responsible for it. In those situations, they don't represent the entire race. Going to that same kind of idea, right? The cartoon and Mark Knight's use of Sambo-like features, right, where Serena Williams' lips are exaggeratedly large, depicting blacks as childish, right? It shows her throwing a tantrum. There's the broken racket on the ground, and then there's a pacifier, right? The use of the pacifier is an exaggeration, but it's also symbolism added by the cartoonist to make his point, right? Which was to basically humiliate and make fun of Serena Williams, not to, actually acknowledge the fact that the referee was biased, and that he was holding her to a higher standard than he holds other athletes, right? Because of her race and partially because of her gender, sex. And again, the white male referee all points to this racist idea still existing in the modern world, right? The excerpt was talking about boxing matches in 1908, but the cartoon is talking about an event in 2018. Naomi Osaka, as well, a Japanese-American athlete, is whitewashed and being put into the position of the model minority, right, where she's basically forced to side with the white man in power. Osaka can represent Asians, and she would win the cultural war by acting white, right, by sticking with the white man. But Serena Williams can only lose here, right? And that just reinforces the racist idea and stereotypes, right? There's absolutely no way for Serena Williams to come across in this cartoon as the actual, the hardworking athlete that she actually is. Whereas Naomi Osaka, because of her race and because of the race of the referee, gets like a free pass. At this point, I'm going to stop because I know that the timer went over, and I'm going to simulate what it would look like if the teacher was to start asking questions, right? So I'm not going to run in the other room. That seems silly. But at this point, the teacher would ask questions about some of the things that I mentioned, right? So, for example, earlier in the commentary, you were talking about the early in the commentary, we were talking about this idea of the great white hope. Can you go back and elaborate on that a little bit more? Right. Switching to the student. Yes. Okay. So after Jack Johnson starts winning fights, basically white America says we need a white boxing athlete to take him out, primarily because he won against a white athlete, but also because he was kind of flaunting the fact that he won, right? By, quote unquote, being uppity, right? By wearing fancy clothing, by having a white woman on his arm, right? At that point, it says that white people started to cry out for a great white hope to beat Johnson. That hope was a retired heavyweight champion, James J. Jeffries. Retired, right? A single word sentence, right? It's emphasizing the fact that they were basically willing to throw anyone in the ring, right? They just needed somebody to take out Jack Johnson. Their hope was someone who had already quit the sport. He talks about there's no need to build suspense. Again, that people were going after him not just because of the way he had this inflated ego. He had a white wife, so basically they had to find a way to get rid of him. The point that I wanted to make clear about that was that the whole reason that they did this, the whole reason that they frame him, the whole reason that they even bothered to send a retired boxer after him was because they could not deal with the fact that this black athlete had beaten a white athlete, because they didn't see it as an individual beating an individual at a sport. They saw it as an entire race beating another entire race at a sport. At this point, the teacher would say, great, thank you very much. Is there anything else in your commentary that you didn't get a chance to ask, or excuse me, that you didn't get a chance to say that you would like to share now? Switching over to the student role, right? Yes. So I just want to talk about how basically everybody has good days and bad days, right? That has absolutely nothing to do with race. Both of these texts show that we often do things instinctively, right? We instinctively look for racial representatives in sports. And it's something that we are not taught, but we learn it, right? Because it's been so pervasive in our culture for so long. However, we do that without actually seeing the underlying racist ideas, right? The controversy over Mark Knight's racist cartoon is proof of this, right? Otherwise, there would be no controversy, right? If he was criticizing one athlete, that would be one thing. But because his criticizing Serena Williams sparks debate around racism, the two ideas cannot be separated. And that is the exact point that Ibram X. Kendi and Jason Reynolds are trying to make in Stamped, right? That, well, you can't separate them because you're still operating under these racist ideas, which are antiquated, unfair, and unsustainable, right? We need to break ourselves away from that pattern. We need to actively attempt to be anti-racist. At this point, the teacher would say, thank you very much for your time. This concludes your IA examination. You may now log off of Zoom. And that would be the end of the discussion. So I'm going to do that now.